students, in this lesson we will be discussing my favorite, well, I shouldn't say favorite because I love all types of public speaking, but we will be discussing informative speaking. So before we begin, let's look at the objectives for this lecture. By the end of this lecture, I would like you to be able to define informative speaking, identify strategies for an effective informative speech, identify topics for an informative speech, and know how to develop a topic for an audience. So, let's begin. So, what exactly is informative? What exactly is an informative speech? An informative speech conveys knowledge to an audience. So, you're conveying what you know to the audience. For instance, if you know how to bake cookies, you might convey to an audience the steps to making a cookie. The information in the informative speech should be accurate and current. Your information should be mostly factual. It should be very, very accurate and should be very, very precise and be very factual. You know, something from Wikipedia or another, like a blog, might not always be accurate, so you want to make sure that when you're presenting information that it is accurate and you are portraying the information on how it is to the audience. Your information should also be current. Something from 1991 probably isn't going to be as useful because it's not as current. However, something from 2016 to 2017 might be more current and might be more reliable, I should say. So it might be more useful to the audience. Something 1991 isn't going to be as useful as it would be now. So now that we have an understanding of what informative speaking is, let's look at some strategies for an effective informative speech. You should always make sure that your information is clear and interesting to the audience. You have to find some way to grab and pull your audience into a speech. I was told by a speech coach, I was actually on the speech team at Mankato State, and I was told how sometimes informative speeches can somewhat be boring if you all listen to a lecture, and I hope this isn't the case with my lecture because I try to keep it engaging, but sometimes when you're in a lecture, you can just, it's boring, you can snooze, it's just dull. So that's why it's important to really, really keep your audience interested and engaged in the topic, whether it be through your visual aids, whether it be through your delivery. You have to find some way to get your audience to really, really be tied to your topic in some way. You should also adjust the complexity to the audience and make sure the information is understandable to the audience. Make sure that what you are sharing is something that the audience can understand and relate to. If you share information that someone who's a kindergartner isn't going to understand, then you might want to make sure that that information is understandable to all ages and no matter what, because you might get students that are of all different ages, so you have to make sure that information is understandable to everybody in the room, not just one, but to everybody. Avoid unnecessary or complex language. I know this can sometimes be an issue with medical terminology. Some of the medical terminology, even I don't even understand. So if you're going to use complex language, make sure that you define those concepts and you define it, because your audience isn't going to know maybe your audience doesn't understand what ethnocentrism is, so you have to really make sure that you define it and clearly explain in order for the audience to understand. Keep information limited. Make sure to narrow a topic. If you're going to give a speech on English, that would be way too broad, because there's so many different areas in English you can discuss. Now, if you were to discuss, on a book, you were to look at the Pacific, maybe a Pacific character, that's going Pacific. And that's making it more understandable to the audience. If you go too overly broad, it makes things just frustrating and confusing for your audience, but when you go more specific, it makes things more clear and understanding because you can focus more on different features of the topic rather than having to focus on all this and do too much. And when you do go way too broad, it causes you to go over time. It causes you to not be able to explore the topic in detail. So really going specific will allow you to really inform your audience and go into more detail and depth for your audience to understand. And make sure that you link the knowledge that your audience currently has and give them new information. Maybe your audience already has a lot of current information, already has enough information on recycling, so maybe update them on some new information that maybe they haven't heard or maybe they haven't been informed on. So taking what they already know and giving them some brand new insights and perspectives and teaching them something new. Make the speech memorable through examples and explanations. Find some way to make your speech something that your audience will always remember, something that will always stick with them. And you can do that through maybe like if you're doing it on recycling, give them examples of recycling, give them some really good thorough examples, but also provide explanations. And that's where, like I was discussing in the previous slides, that sometimes if you use complex language or complex terminology, make sure that you provide examples and provide explanations so that your informative speech is understandable and is somewhat special and something that your audience will always remember. And make the speech relevant and useful to the audience. Remember, it's about your audience. It's not about you, it's about your audience. So make sure that it's something that your audience can relate to or that's kind of relevant to them. Maybe like ethnocentrism, that can affect certain people, but maybe you want to do like globalization, that's affecting everybody. So making sure that your topic and your speech is something that is going to be useful and helpful to the audience. Okay, let's look at some topics in informative speaking. One topic is objects. So that could be like places or things. For instance, maybe if you went to Rome, Italy, and you want to inform your audience on Rome, Italy, that might be an example of an object speech. Another topic is people, specific individuals and the roles they play. So maybe you give a speech on Isaac Newton and the role he played and how he contributed to society as a whole. Events, something that occurred once repeatedly. Maybe you want to talk about 9/11 or how the day that Americans gained independence and now the reason why we have the 4th of July Independence Day. So those could be examples of events. Concepts, abstract ideas such as ethnocentrism, which I've been explaining in the previous slides. Or globalization might be another example of concepts you could use. And then processes, helping audience perform or understand it, should include phases or steps. When I took public speaking in high school, they had a speech called demonstrative speech, which, as we all know, not all colleges have that currently, and I really wish they would because I think it'd be useful, because in some ways, you're going to have to demonstrate something to an audience someday, right? So when I was in high school public speaking, I did a demonstrative speech on the card game called Garbage. No, it's not about picking up garbage or anything like that. Actually, my speech do with that. That was about, I was like, no, it's not. It's actually a card game. So what I explained is like, I kind of explained what the game was, and then I explained, so this is how you play it, these are the steps, and I kind of demonstrated to them how you play the game of Garbage, and explained each step by step how you play it, and that it is an example of a process or a demonstrative type of topic. Okay, developing topic for an audience. You want to focus on areas where the audience is experiencing confusion and use that as a guide for your speech. Maybe there's something that your audience doesn't understand about ethnocentrism, and you can use that as a guide to kind of help clear up any confusion that they're having. And like we were discussing in our previous lectures about like audience analysis, maybe even doing an audience analysis to see what is the audience not understanding about ethnocentrism, what is the audience not understanding about globalization, and using that as a guide to create your speech. So let's look at some of the sources of audience confusion. The first is difficulty understanding concepts or language. And like I had said before, some people might not know about globalization. Some people might not know about ethnocentrism. Just because you do doesn't mean your audience does. That's why you need to make sure you clarify the meaning of the concept, really explain it, give a good solid definition, and then explain the use of the concept by explaining the features of the concept. So looking at the different features of globalization or looking at the different features of ethnocentrism, making sure you really explain that concept in detail, not just defining it, but also looking at the features so your audience can fully understand the concept. Another source of confusion is difficulty envisioning process or structure. Give the audience the big picture sketch on the process, and use visual aids and explain the relationships among the components of the process. So maybe someone in your audience has never baked before and doesn't understand how to bake cookies, so maybe show the visual aid of somebody, mixing it up. Maybe show a visual aid of the audience of a person putting in the oven. Show a person maybe putting the dough on a baking sheet. So really explaining it through those visuals can help an audience really understand and gain a better perspective of how to bake cookies or how to, play the game garbage. And sometimes visual aids can really be useful to helping someone understand a process. And finally, we have difficulty understanding because it is hard to believe. Maybe your audience doesn't believe that aliens exist. Your audience does not believe in, mythical legends or whatever. Doesn't believe that, whatever. So discuss the audience theory. So discuss their theory of why aliens don't exist and show why it is reasonable. So show why the theory of aliens don't exist is in some ways reasonable. Then show how that theory is limited. So how is the theory of aliens are real limited? And then explain why your explanation that aliens are in fact real is more accurate and more reliable, more credible. So that includes our lecture, and I hope you all have a wonderful and lovely day.